So if for some reason your internet is not working right now, don't fear. You can get to all the resources later, and then you can always reach out to me if for some reason you just can't find the resources. And we may have to. We may also have to improvise in the room. I do have a lot of activities set up for us to do today, but if the internet isn't working, we will modify as we go. But everyone online can participate because if the internet is working for them online. So I'm gonna do it all together. So just a little bit of background about myself. My name is Barbara Huth. I am the Manager of Education Content and Professional Development at Common Sense. And this is my contact information. If you want to reach out, if you have any questions after today, please don't hesitate to reach out. And just for me to get a little idea of who's in the room with me, and those of you that are joining virtually, if you could just let me know, how many of you have heard of Common Sense Education before? Great. How many of you have used our lessons, resources? Perfect. Okay, so today's presentation is going to show you some of our resources and just thinking about it in terms of civic learning and civic action. And then how many of you are elementary educators? Any elementary? Good, great. Any middle school educators? Perfect. And then any high school educators? Great, awesome. Okay, I think there's a little bit of something for everyone. In this presentation, a lot of the content is going to be geared towards secondary, but I'll try to frame what you can do as an elementary educator as well as you're thinking about these things. So as we know, young people are very engaged in important political issues, right? And there's arguments to say that Gen Z is one of the most engaged civically in different ways. So as we're getting started thinking about how to engage our students in topics that they care about, I want us to take a moment to share some of the opportunities and then also some of the challenges that the current technology landscape provides for young people to be civically engaged. So we're going to answer these on a Jamboard. And if the Jamboard's not working for you in person, feel free to just share out a challenge or an opportunity.
I know that it is now that it is. Yeah, I go to this session. Sorry, I didn't realize this. That's okay. Okay, perfect.
Okay, and I'm seeing some stickies coming on in for opportunities and challenges. If you never used Jamboard before, if you just go to the left-hand side, you can choose a color of sticky note and type your response and then just move it to any part of the Jamboard as well. And if anyone's having trouble connecting and wants to share aloud some challenges or some opportunities. Okay, I'm seeing find others with similar passions, right? Technology creates that opportunity where you can find people, connect, right? And that's a great thing as we're thinking about civic learning. Access to information, right? As our students are seeing injustices, they can then come and participate and engage and socially connect to make change. Great, and then we're seeing a lot of challenges as well, right? Maybe not engaging in person with peers, difficulty knowing what sources to trust, right? Misinformation is a huge challenge around this. Safety and security, comments lost in translation, so maybe how they're coming across, because it's different communicating, right, in digital form than in person. Anyone want to add anything to this? So as we know, there are a lot of opportunities, and we kind of listed some of the challenges. In some recent research, we saw that students are very interested in current events, right? And a lot of times they're getting their current events from social media, and that shouldn't be news to us, right? For the most part, they're getting their headlines from Instagram and YouTube, but a vast majority of them cannot tell, not a vast majority, but actually close to a majority of them cannot tell what is real from fake, right? So misinformation is hard for them to identify. And so that is one challenge, and a lot of you had listed that there. And another challenge that our students are facing is that young people are encountering online hate speech at higher rates than 2 years prior. And you can see some of the recent research we did where students have told us that they are encountering or seeing hate speech online more often than 2 years ago. So these are just some of the data points of the things that you pointed out for challenges. But as we're thinking about these challenges, we also know there are a lot of opportunities for our students. And so how can we encourage our students to be curious, empathetic, and civically minded in this digital landscape, in this digital world? So I'm going to propose 4 things today and give you some actual, strategic resources to use with them. So the first is to foster digital citizenship dispositions or habits of mind. And so for those of you that are teaching our curriculum has these 5 dispositions woven throughout the curriculum. So whether you're teaching the elementary lessons or the high school lessons and those in between, you are teaching these dispositions. So you're not just teaching digital citizenship skills, but you are also teaching them to slow down and self-reflect before they're sharing information, to seek facts and evidence, right? So that news and media literacy component, to consider other people's perspectives, envision many different options, right? 2 different scenarios, and then not just be passive about what they're doing, also take action, right? So that civic action part is there woven throughout the lessons. And I'm just going to show you a few ways to kind of think about it, to take it a step further. And when we're thinking about civic action and civic learning, those 4 categories of our topic areas are probably the 4 big ones that we're looking at. Granted, you can have some topics in media balance and well-being and privacy and security, but you're more likely to find them in those other 4 categories. So if you're teaching any of those lessons in the news and media literacy, cyberbullying, digital drama, or hate speech, relationships and communication, or the digital footprint and identity, you may have started to see some of these civic learning connections with your students. The second thing that you can do is create norms for communicating with civility in debates and discussions. And we actually have a lesson called We Are Civil Communicators. It is a 12th grade lesson, but you can find lessons that build off civil communication in the lower grades as well. So I've linked the lesson here. But a big part of this lesson, it talks about civil discourse. And what is civil discourse? And I think this is something, we have a definition here, but I also think it's something that as a class, you should determine what are our norms, right, for communicating with each other when we're engaging in debates and discussions. So thinking about this definition, but then also bringing your students' definitions and points of view into this definition is really important. So within this lesson, there is a video with Cameron Caskey from the March for Our Lives movement. Has anyone taught this lesson before seeing this lesson? Okay, so I just want you to reflect individually about what Cameron Caskey is saying about debating with people that disagree with you. And just think to yourself, do you agree or disagree with his thoughts? And I'm
Years old now. After a horrible tragedy at my school, my friends and I came together to try to change the narrative of school shootings.
Our job is to protect our country, and if our elected officials aren't doing it, we have to step up.
So we came together and started a movement that was very much mobilized by social media. We were tweeting out a lot, we were using our Instagram to connect with other people and show them our messaging in a really accessible way. We didn't really plan to do a social media-based movement. We planned to do a movement, and we didn't even think about what it was like to base it in social media, because that's just how we interact with each other. And it was hard. And over the course of the year, we have been harassed online. I received countless death threats. I received very lewd images in my Instagram direct messages. We were attacked like adults, but we were not defended like kids. I have personally said things online that I'm sure I'll look at as an adult and not be very thrilled about. And a lot of us learned a lot about how we interact with each other in social media. There are a lot of things about the Parkland movement that I think are amazing, and a lot of things I regret, but one thing I can tell you that is my point of pride after all of this is that people don't remember Parkland as the city that was destroyed. People remember Parkland as the city that was strong and brave enough to stand up and say, we are not going to let you get away with another one of these. The one lesson I wish I had learned before all of this started was that the internet, while it's not real life, is becoming a part of it. It's all about remembering that the social media exists to supplement personal connections and not replace them. Behind every single account on Twitter, unless they're a bot, there's a human being typing. And that person might not realize just who they're interacting with. So you feel like it doesn't mean anything, and you feel like the people who see your comments aren't affected by it. We are now a part of this large ocean of connection, and it's now our job to be responsible. We need to hold ourselves accountable so somebody else doesn't do it for us. I used to look down on people. I put myself on a pedestal, and I encouraged a lot of my friends to do it as well. I treated people who disagreed with me like they weren't as good human beings as I was. I did a town hall debate at CNN. Emotions were high, and just a week ago, people that I loved were killed. I went up and asked my Senator, Marco Rubio, if he would stop taking money from the NRA.
Can you tell me right now that you will not accept a single donation from the NRA in the future?
And I wish I had stopped it there, but before that, I compared him to the likeness of the shooter from my school. I became part of the problem because I went up there on that debate to make another human being look bad as a human being and not as a politician. Because I wanted to go up there and embarrass him. I wanted to ruin his career. I did not do that to benefit the conversation. I did not do that to benefit our discourse as human beings. I did that to make another person look bad. I learned a lesson from it, and I'm thrilled that we went out there, and I'm thrilled that we were able to make this conversation such a national topic. But at the end of the day, I'm never gonna do something like that again. That's where we can stop this. We had counter-protesters at all our events who were the same people who were commenting these awful things in our social media posts. When we broke the wall, when we simply just spoke to them and we became humans interacting with other humans, things changed. I was in Texas this summer. I met a man who came up to me, shook my hand, and said, I went after you on Twitter a lot this year. I said some nasty things about you on the internet. But the fact that you're coming up here to this counter-protest really taught me something, because I didn't know that you kids were interested in approaching this like people. He introduced me to his wife and kids who were all out there protesting us as well. And they said they don't know if they want to do this again, because when we came up and connected with them, it changed the way they look at it. That left me floored. And that's why it's so important to look at people who disagree with you like other human beings. When people disagree with you on political issues, you have to remember that approaching them like this is your enemy it's not going to do anything for you. You have to approach everybody in bitterly social and political situations like they're part of the same world that you are. Approach a bitterly partisan topic, but come from a place where you want to learn. You learn the most from the people who disagree with you. I'm not speaking about any specific issues, but Be ready to learn something. Assume that every single person you speak to knows something that you don't, because it's true. Remember that the best thing you can do as a human being is lift another person up, not knock them down. I think you're allowed to criticize my messaging without criticizing my character or who I am. These are emotional topics because they affect us. A lot of kids like me and like you believe what we believe because of our upbringing. That's okay. That's how we were raised. It's part of our character. I used to not understand how someone could disagree with me. But be ready to change people's hearts, be ready to change people's minds, and be open to changing your mind.
Okay, what resonated with you the most from what Cameron Caskey said?
The fact that he realized he made a mistake and wanted to fix that later on in life. I mean, being that young and being able to have that maturity to grow like that means a lot. I see it in some of my 7th and 8th graders. It's just impressive that young, they have that self-realization, self-actualization.
Yes. Anyone else? Anything else resonate? Yes.
Remembering that there's a person on the other end of whatever the interaction is, and that, you know, he said the biggest change in someone's opinion was from a face-to-face interaction.
Right, yes, and realizing, seeing that person, right, is important, the humanity of it. What else?
I thought it was really powerful that through his conversations that he learned that you really need to come from a place where you want to continue to learn when you debate with somebody. And that if we can get kids to think about those conversations as not a debate, but as a place that they can have the opportunity to learn from each other, then it might transform the way that they actually communicate.
Yes, right. Be ready to learn something. Come to the table to learn something, like when you're having these discussions and debates and setting that framework. Anything else that stood out?
From the chat, somebody said connecting to people with different viewpoints helps everyone better understand difficult conversations.
Hey, so true, right? And sometimes there's gonna be things in these discussions that come up that you might not have thought about, right? So having those experiences with understanding someone else's perspective, right? And seeking to understand. Great. Okay, and I just want to point out that this video is a part of this lesson, but it's also a part of a quick activity. So let's say you don't have a full time to teach this lesson, but you want to kind of cover some of this stuff as you're engaging in debates and discussions within your classroom. There's quick activities that have these kind of questions that you can modify as well and add to along with the lesson. So I linked that on the slide and I just wanted to point that out. That's a part of a quick activity as well. And within this lesson, it has a strategy for debating, and it's called COOL, which I don't think any student says anymore, but just before you debate, remember to be cool, which is maybe an oxymoron there, but just be calm, open-minded, only focus on the ideas and listen actively. And what does it mean to listen actively? We say that a lot, but what does it really mean to listen actively? And when we're kind of surrounded with our devices too, how do we show someone that we're listening actively to them?
Well, I think that your comment is kind of what I was thinking is like, it's not just listening, it's acknowledging the other person and making them feel like they're being heard, right?
Right?
Even in the most subtle way.
Yes. So what are some of those subtle ways? Eye contact.
Yeah.
I would also add that asking questions when you don't understand what they're saying
Sure.
shows that you're actively listening, because you can ask a well-formatted question without knowing the conversation and topic.
Great. Yes. Ask questions.
And just to build on that, I think asking a question is a good response, because I think sometimes you can tell when somebody is waiting to say whatever
Argument.
they're going to say. And you can't really listen to what someone else is saying when you're formulating your own response. And so if you force yourself into the habit of asking a question, then you really do have to engage with that other person, as opposed to just saying whatever you want to say.
Yes. And it is so hard because especially when you're in these heated debates, you want to you can see people starting to formulate their thoughts. And just pausing for a minute, right? Someone is sharing something really important to them in their experience, and just having that moment to pause right? And reflect and really feel engaged that person and what they're saying and sharing is really helpful.
Sometimes repeating back, like what I'm hearing you say is, instead of having a response back already, just to make sure that you're understanding what they're saying to you.
That's, yeah, just having that rephrasing, right? Or just kind of reiterating what they're saying to make sure there's that common understanding. Okay, so we are actually going to do a debate together on a digital dilemma in just a moment. And a good way to start these debates is to actually create community norms around what does it mean to communicate with civility, right? And I mentioned that earlier today. And I was thinking maybe we could just put some norms for this group, so either online and then also in person, of what it means, right? What do we want our norms to be in this group for communicating? And I actually took this worksheet, it came from a 3rd grade lesson, and I modified it for this particular lesson. And that's where it came from. So if you've taught like my digital citizenship pledge, this is kind of the same idea, but just around this idea. So if you go to the Google Sheet here, if you're able to get on the internet, you'll see that I put numbers. So if you want to just like pick a number that someone is not typing in and add a norm. And then I also want you to think about, how does that norm contribute to the goal of communicating with civility? So how does that communicate with also building this community where we feel safe to share our perspectives, right? And we feel heard. And we're also listening, right? With intent to understand. So kind of just think about what norms you would like this group to have. And I think I said this before, but it's really important that your students are a part of this norm making within your group and within your class, and that all students agree on the norms. So like after you create the norms and the goal of the norms, then you kind of talk about them and have that conversation. So given our time, we're not going to spend as much time talking about our norms, but it's really important to have those conversations about the norms. One strategy when you're doing this with students is maybe have them self-reflect first and write down the norms and then share them digitally, right? Just to give them a little more time on their norms. And I see some really great norms coming in. And as we do the next activity, I encourage you to keep these norms up so you can see what your colleagues have put in there and just kind of reflect on those as we're having our next discussion. Respecting each other as human beings. We use the names of others when responding. To acknowledge them, perhaps. I'm gonna scroll down and see if there's any. Awesome. Okay, so if you're still working on your norm and your goal, continue. Did anything come up as you're reading these norms?
After COVID.
So
It's very annoying.
So we have.
Care. They're like, why? Should be a good human.
So at the end, I'm going to show you a lesson that kind of talks about like finding your purpose and kind of thinking about like what you can do within your current situation. But we also have social emotional learning lessons in digital life that might also kind of work on some of that apathy to empathy parts. And I think also like having discussions where you're listening to the perspectives and experiences of your classmates, and then that kind of develops that empathy as well.
I also think maybe starting off with videos like that, where you're watching it from someone who's not a part of the group and creating those norms with somebody else before you do it with the people that you care about and might personally offend. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so
Like, don't start off your first debate with something that's really heated and really personal and like that you could really offend somebody.
For sure. So having a video with perspectives, but not necessarily from those that you know, right? So now you're kind of looking at those outside perspectives and starting to think about those, and then some expanding it out to other perspectives within the class. Yes.
I also particularly noticed this year that just establishing more of a classroom dynamic and just like a community is so important, because they've forgotten how to, for some of them. It's been so long.
Yeah, and that's a good point. So like, as you're creating your norms, like you also want to create, like, if someone breaks the norm, like how are you going to not call out the other student, but like, how are you going to address the fact that that norm has been broken in a way that's positive and productive, right? And you can move forward. So having those discussions as well as you're creating these norms is really important.
I was gonna ask a question. I noticed like when we're typing in this Google Doc, it gives like anonymous names. I was just thinking maybe somebody else's reflection. I personally feel like if you put the students' names, then it makes them more responsible, more accountable. But I also get that maybe you use the anonymous so that they're comfortable sharing. But I think that goes back almost to that digital citizenship, where we got to be accountable for what we say and do. And by putting their names on it, it almost makes them more accountable.
And in this case, I think they're anonymous because like you're using through my Google and we're not like in the same Google Drive. But I think like if you were doing it like in Google Classroom, you could have it where students' names are there, or you could actually have I could have had you put your name next to your norm as well.
Same thing on your pod too. And your pod puts everybody's name.
Well, and I know like in things that I've done, you have the option to let them be anonymous or to show their names. And I was just thinking that, again, it's easy to hide behind an avatar or whatever.
Yeah, so having those conversations, and sometimes you could also have them within a group, like talk about their norms and decide as a group, what's your, a few norms that you want to share as a class. But I would first have students reflect individually so that all voices are heard in those norm making processes. Okay, so the third thing that you can do to build these skills and habits is to have students use thinking routines to navigate through digital dilemmas. And so if you've been teaching the lessons, you may have noticed that there are 3 different thinking routines that pop up often. The first is digital habits checkup, and that's more of a self-reflection in that rings of responsibility. The second is feelings and options. And this is really that social emotional skill thinking routine that really has them think about their relationships within their community, right, and others. And then the third thinking routine is take a stand. And this is the one that we're going to look at today. And this is the one that really talks about some of those digital dilemmas about community and civic life. And these dilemmas were actually created in partnership with Project Zero and the Harvard Graduate School of Education. So there is research behind these thinking routines, and using these thinking routines to navigate digital dilemmas that are not personal, but yet, that are more general, can really help foster those digital citizenship skills and habits of mind, or those dispositions that we shared earlier. So we are going to do an example of the take a stand routine. Has anyone done this routine with their students? Awesome. What was your experience?
Well, so we did that, and we also did the Jostens like Renaissance thing, which is similar, where it's like cross the line or walk the line or whatever. I think it helps to build that empathy because, well, one thing is you don't necessarily know things about people that are that deep, because it starts off, lighthearted and whatnot, but then it gets a little deeper as you go. So I think it builds that empathy as you go.
And the good thing is with these thinking routines, you want to use them repeatedly. So you don't want to just like, okay, we just did one digital dilemma, we're done, right? You even might want to bring that same digital dilemma later on throughout the year and see how students have grown with their responses and with how they're responding with empathy as they go on. So this thinking routine has 4 steps, and it comes with a worksheet where students would fill in their information. We're going to do some of this digitally so we can interact with each other. I'll also show you like some ways you can get up and like move if you want to get up and move as well as you're kind of going through the thinking routine. And you're going to see here, it says insert dilemma here. So some of the lessons have a thinking routine with them and they have a dilemma with that lesson. But we also have a digital dilemma hub and thinking routine place on our website, where there are educator guides for each of the thinking routines that also include dilemmas for that thinking routine. So I've linked the Take a Stand educator guide, and it will give you kind of some background of how to use Take a Stand.
So Take a Stand is an example of a thinking routine, is that? what you're
Yes,
saying?
so it's one of the 3 thinking routines that are within the
Okay,
curriculum. And then as you scroll down, you're going to see some teacher guidance here. And then keep scrolling and you're going to see some dilemmas. So here are a compilation of dilemmas that you can pull from and use within these thinking routines. So you could use them in conjunction with the lesson, or you could use them just as a starting conversation point with a current event or something that's happening that your students are caring about. So we are going to actually do the Take a Stand thinking routine with that first dilemma, the protest. So I want you to take a moment to read this dilemma. And when you've finished reading, I want you to just reflect for a moment to yourself individually. Do you agree with the practice of calling out protesters' identities online? And if you have pen and paper, you can write rationale down, or you can type it or just tuck it away. In terms of where you stand on this particular issue.
Are these adults? Can we assume they're adults?
So the dilemmas are vague on purpose for these kind of questions. They have those nuances. So these are good things for you to consider.
That's what they are. Yes,
Yeah.
the hope.
Yeah.
They could be high school.
True.
So they are employed, yes, we have that clue. But the age of them, we do not know. Does anyone need more time reading the dilemma? Okay. So now I want you to tell me if you agree or disagree with that statement. So do you agree with the practice of calling out protesters' identities online? So what we could do is we could get up and we could stand, right, create a line and have one side of the room be strongly disagree, one side of the room be strongly agree. We could even do 4 corners right here. But we are going to do a Mentimeter. I'll try to. And when you go to that Mentimeter, you should be able to move that dot across.
Mine was just a blank word. Yeah, it's a fill in the blank.
Oh, cool. Okay, let me try this.
There we go.
Let me go back. Hopefully it will still work if I.
Yeah, there's a go to slide button that makes it.
Sorry about that.
So should it be the fill in the blank?
It shouldn't be. It should say your presenters changed your slide. You might need to refresh if it doesn't. Apologies for that. That's the next. If you're waiting in anticipation, that's the next slide. So you should be able to scroll over it if you strongly agree or strongly disagree, or if you're somewhere in between. And in this, for this particular tool, I will not know and no one will know who answered what here, okay? So for here is just gonna be anonymous, but we will be able to see how many people are agreeing or disagreeing or, you know, where they're standing. Another modification to this that I like to do is have everyone kind of put their, where if they agree or disagree in a hat, right? Fold it, put it in a hat with no names, have someone pull one out and then have them go to the different parts of the room and take on that perspective of someone else, right? Which kind of, you know, gets another skill within this activity. Okay, so let's look at our results. All right, interesting. So we're kind of right in the middle here. And like I said, you can see kind of how many people are either agreeing or disagreeing, right? So we kind of have a wide range of perspectives, which is always good to see in these kind of conversations. So the next thing I want you to do is share your rationale. And some of you had already started, and that's great. But share your rationale for why you agreed or disagreed with that statement. And if you're comfortable sharing aloud, if you're in person, feel free to share as well out loud. Okay. And as you're sharing your rationale, make sure you're taking your community norms that we agreed to as you share that rationale. And then as we kind of get into this next part of the discussion that we're looking at those community norms. Great, and I love to see I have questions, right? So really having our students think, is anyone violent? Did they harm someone else? So kind of thinking about those questions. Then we have that protest is a right. Person is being a responsible citizen. Oh, okay, and something you can do for that exact moment is you can pause the scroll. And you can also highlight lesson or highlight quotes and points of view and show them to the class to have a further discussion. And if you give your students the Mentimeter responses link, you could have them break out into groups and look at some of those points of view and have a further discussion, right? A small group discussion about some of these points of view and just kind of expand on those, not knowing exactly where they came from.
Is there a way for, can the kids see this screen on theirs? Because
So
I'm not able to for some reason.
okay, so you can't, the way you could do this is if I shared, and I'm going to share that with you on the next slide, the responses link, so that you could see it on your screen. So if you pop to that next slide to look at the responses, it's actually 2 slides forward. If you click on that link, and it's taking me to my presentation, but you should be able to see the responses. Can you see them? So we just stood back and shared our rationale for if we agreed or disagreed with the statement. Did everyone get a chance to share either digitally or if they want to share out loud or in the chat their rationale? What I want you to do now is actually look at the responses. So you have to share your point of view. And now I want you to look at the responses. And was there something shared that you had not originally considered? And as you're looking at those responses, kind of look at that and also think about like, why might you have not considered that? What is in your experience, right, that might have been different? That is a reason why you might not have considered that.
I like the one that says their privacy. Hold on. Their privacy is not the issue. I don't think it's right to shame them online, but I think it's absolutely fair to want to know who they are in your community. Maybe someone is running for office and their actions would affect the vote. You don't need to like be hateful towards them, but that could be really important for you to know.
Anyone else see anything that they didn't originally consider? And one of the reasons why we may not have considered some of these points of view is because we were answering pretty quickly, right? We didn't have a lot of time to kind of break this down. So we're listening to each other for our gut reaction of what's happening here. Anything else that stands out to anyone? And I'll go back to the slides just so if you are having internet troubles, you can see. And let me resume screen.
It's an interesting perspective to think about the way it could lead into their professional life, whether that's a bias or something that could create violence in their job.
Right, so thinking about that kind of moving into professional life, personal to professional, right? What are the implications? If they're a teacher, right, or an educator, does that change things? There's some questions to think about. Anything else standing out?
I'm glad that somebody did point out that freedom of speech is a constitutional right. However, hate speech is not protected under a constitutional right based on Supreme Court cases. So it is doing something illegal if hate speech is involved. But we are not vigilantes. That is not our right to, you know, punish other people. That's not our job. So you should probably take it to proper authorities.
And so how would you for thinking about that next step, those take action steps, what are some actionable ways for students to kind of respond if they're seeing something like that online?
I can't help but wonder though, it's a picture. And if I were there protesting and I happened to be in the midst of these people, you know, I just think about the picture and how it could be misconstrued. And when you bring up the point that a teacher's there protesting, which, you know, with everything going on, it's kind of scary to even think about how things can be taken out of perspective, but you could be doing what you're supposed to be doing, but be guilty because you're with that group of people. Yeah.
Yeah, so in the digital context, what part has been shared, right? What part of that?
Is there bias from that media source? Is it coming from Fox News or CNN, or is it coming from PBS, NPR?
Right, so asking those questions, right, as you're having this conversation.
I think the other, I think I just lost myself. Let me say it. Go-
I'm
go
so
on.
sorry.
No, sorry.
Anyone else have anything else to share that?
I think for kids, it's hard. I think kids oftentimes don't know where to start. And I think that's oftentimes from a tech coach perspective, how I feel is how do we help these kids send the message in a respectful manner? And what does that look like? Because everybody's environment is so different. And how do we make sure we're not offending someone in the process?
You guys ever done, it's a facing history in ourselves activity, and it's called stand in and then stand out.
Yeah.
And it talks about kind of what your experiences are online. And at the end, it talks about if you've seen hate speech or something online, how many of you have acted or said something about it, right? And I think there was a comparison between people you know versus people you don't know. And it's just a really powerful thing to see, and to do with educators too, of how many people have actually been able to do that, right? Because it's a hard thing to do.
Well, I think that goes back to the whole see something, say something thing, or tell a trusted adult kind of stuff. But I also found it interesting that the prompt was so vague because it is bringing out different perspectives that, depending on how you comprehended the passage, it says hate, it uses very strong language. And you could go back to, are the protesters the one at fault, or are the people posting pictures the one at fault? Oh.
Interesting, yes.
And it brings in my, as a social studies teacher, what role is it in a social studies classroom versus a CTE, and is the digital citizenship, should that be a part of an actual citizenship unit? And is it turning into that as the role of the social studies teacher is digital citizenship with how big tech is becoming in everyday lives? I would say yes.
And
Well, 100, I agree, but
Standards
not every,
change
but
to
the
align to
standards
that.
don't
Yeah.
mention it, and, many people are actually doing it in the rooms.
True, very true. There's so many connections with social studies, and then I taught environmental science for a long time, and there's just so many connections to especially digital dilemmas and kind of thinking about the civic engagement piece in the digital sphere. Okay, and then the final part of the take a stand is to look beyond, right? And have students think about and reflect, how does this dilemma remind them of other situations that you've seen, heard about, or experienced? And in this part, it's really great. You can bring in current events, kind of have students share some things that they've been seeing, bring in that news and media literacy angle here, and kind of have them look deeper. One of my favorite resources for news and media literacy and things that are being shared on social media to kind of build off this is the SIFT. Has anyone used the SIFT from the News Literacy Project? If you sign up for the SIFT, it's free, and they send you kind of viral things that have been shared, and then they break them down for you, which is a really great way to have students kind of.
How do you spell it? SIFT?
SIFT, yes. The SIFT newsletter by the News Literacy Project. And they'll send them to you Monday morning, and then you have those for the week, right? And you don't even have to kind of do all that background work.
The SIFT or the shift?
SIFT, SIFT. And I had it in this presentation, but then I had to pull back, so I always do too much. and I was like, pull back.
Is it appropriate for middle school?
I would say so. I would just read,
Yeah.
Obviously read the posts, but you could definitely find
There's some
some
stuff there, yeah.
that you could share.
NLP has a lot of really great resources if you're not familiar with
Who is it?
the News Literacy Project.
Oh, gotcha.
Yeah, which is the SIFT is from the News Literacy Project. But
Thank
It's
you.
it's a great resource. And they actually have some additional resources with that that kind of give you some lesson plans too around it. And I can add that to the presentation. I had it originally and then re-upload it to the site if anyone's interested in the SIFT. Okay, so what skills or strategies do you hope students would take away from a conversation like this or an activity, a thinking routine? You can either answer on the Mentimeter, you can share out loud. But what are some skills or strategies you hope are takeaways if you incorporate these thinking routines within your classes?
Did you go through all the thinking routines? Wasn't there one?
So I only went through take a stand because.
No, I'm sorry. I thought there was a step in there that was like, go back and look at your own perspective or something.
Yeah, so we did that with just like, go back. We didn't do the actual look at your own perspective. I just said like, was there anything you didn't originally
That's what,
consider?
okay, I see.
So I modified it
Yeah,
slightly.
okay.
But yeah, actually having students go back to what they wrote is really powerful too, and have them kind of rewrite and think about, has it changed? And then why? All right. I'm seeing some come in. So I'm thinking like, questioning your belief system. So like thinking about your identity, right? And what makes up your identity and maybe how you're influenced by things that you're seeing, making sure you're having those conversations. And breaking out in these, leads to more news and media literacy skills, right? Breaking out of your filter bubbles, right? When you're online, if you're only seeing the same perspectives all the time. And Cameron Caskey kind of talked a little bit about that too. Right? Empathy, reflection, understanding. Read before you share. Just pause for a minute. Okay. All right, and just to show you this thinking routine and those dispositions that I introduced earlier, this is where they play out within this thinking routine. And you might have actually done several dispositions and you didn't realize it as you were going through that process. But this is how those thinking routines really build in those dispositions. Did you feel like you were doing all of those things as you were going through that thinking routine? Great. So if you're interested in where are all the thinking routines currently within the lessons, I highlighted in green where the take a stand ones are, but you can also see the other two thinking routines and where they play out. If you're an elementary teacher and you're like, I want to use these thinking routines in my classroom, you can go to that thinking routines link and actually go and pull one of the thinking routines and make your, like, put a dilemma within there and have the students kind of go through those thinking routines. Some of the dilemmas I would say are a little more for the upper grades, but you could definitely pull some dilemmas that elementary students may be experiencing. And some of the lessons have some dilemmas as well. Okay, and then the final thing, how can we have students take those opportunities, right? Overcome the challenges. What happened? I can't see Sylvia.
I think it's minimized it.
And actually go into civic engagement, civic learning, civic action. We have a lesson called The Change You Want to See. Has anyone taught this lesson? It is a high school lesson, but I feel like you could use this lesson and modify it to any grade. And it's really having students think about their purpose, right? Their digital footprint, how it incorporates into the world that they want to see, right? And something that stands out to me for this lesson is how can you use technology to make that positive impact on the world? And it gives 3 ideas, right? Sharpen your focus, right? So think about, so after you go through these thinking routines and you're thinking about things that you care about and you're passionate about, right? Think about how you can solve them, right? What are some ways that you can solve them? How can you connect with others to mobilize to solve them? And then finally, what are some things that are tools that are at, that you can access to kind of build a movement? Because the one thing is with technology, you used to have to wait to vote, right? And we obviously want our students to be voters, but a lot of them aren't old enough to vote yet. So what can they do to be civically engaged? So I just want to leave with 3 things to kind of build off of that. So sharpen your focus. A great place to start is just thinking about what are you passionate about? What problems are you trying to solve? And maybe I'm slightly biased as a former environmental science teacher, but the sustainable development goals I think apply to any grade level, any subject area, and really get students kind of starting to think about what they might be passionate about. And it'll also show them ways that they can get involved in the different sustainable development goals. So I linked our review on here, which then will take you also to the sustainable development goals in action if you're not familiar with those. And then how can you connect with others? Well, there's a lot of different ways that you can connect with others online. One of my favorite ways that students can have discussions beyond the classroom, once you feel like you're ready for that, is KQED Learn. And it's about discussions about topics that are important to them. So you can see some topics that are there, and students can engage in conversations kind of in this relatively safe environment, right, with other students from across the country and possibly beyond. So has anyone used KQED Learn discussions? Do you love them?
The guy that does the gerrymandering and electoral college stuff, he's wonderful. And I teach at a predominantly Black school, so seeing a Black man do that stuff is like mind blowing for them.
Awesome. Miles?
Yeah.
Miles is great. And then finally, what's the way you can start a campaign? So that 3rd thing. And I think DoSomething.org is introduced in this lesson. And it's a great way that students can start thinking about how to mobilize, how to do things and make change, right? And start campaigns around topics that that are important to them. So I just want to leave you with 3 things from action steps for students once they feel ready for that. I also want to let you know we have additional civic learning resources. If you're not familiar with, we have a media literacy guide for young voters. If you haven't seen that, the digital citizenship lessons are linked up there. We also have current event conversation guides or articles that talk about additional news and media literacy topics. And then we actually have a news and media literacy resource hub. And we will be creating more content around civic learning as well. That's coming out, and I'm really excited about it. So just stay tuned. And thank you all so much. Does anyone have any questions?
And the resources are free, right?
Yes, so all these resources are free.
You have to create an account, not doesn't matter, but.
Yeah, you have to create an account with your school email, but they are free. I want to thank you all so much. This is the first time I presented this, so.
Woo.
I'm excited.